Alrighty, so today we're looking at childhood trauma and its effects on future substance abuse. And what are we looking at? We're looking at two types of trauma in specific, emotional and physical abuse, and how these two types of traumas affect the cognitive part of the brain, and more specifically, executive functioning. We're also looking at how these executive functioning issues and problems make one more susceptible to drug abuse, in specific cocaine, heroin, opioids, and alcohol abuse. Well, in 2010, Kuroy had a finding that found that childhood trauma was greatly affected the neural structuring of the brain. Cathedral built off of this in 2017, and he went into depth and he said that the executive functioning part of the brain was more so affected than anything else whenever childhood trauma occurs. He goes on to say that these compromised executive functionings make an individual more prone to addictions. Why is this important? Executive functioning is greatly affects the part of the brain that controls memory, critical thinking, as well as self-control. And obviously, the self-control piece is critical when we're talking about substance abuse and how one is more likely to resist substance abuse in the future. Staubach also agreed with Cathedral, and he says that these childhood traumas make one more prone to these types of substance abuse, as well as it creates more of a cognitive issue in the brain. Well, in 2008, Bryan performed a study that tested executive functioning and its correlation between drug use. How did he do this? He took 18 people with opioid dependence and 18 people without a drug dependence for a control group. He put them in a game where they participated in the game of dice task. This game of dice task is a task that provides explicit rules for gains and losses and obvious and stable winning probabilities to its players. Through this, they're able to assess compromised decision-making abilities in the subjects. And we're able to assess executive functioning dysfunctions. In their findings, they were able to find that those with opioid dependence as well as prior traumas recorded lower executive functioning scores almost across the board, showing that those with drug dependencies are more likely to have executive functioning issues as well as prior traumas. Well, in 2010, Kuroy decided that he was going to build off of Bryan's findings in 2008. In this, he gathered 587 participants. And he set out to kind of find what childhood traumas effects on substance abuse were. He tried to find out some of the statistics on it. In this, he used self-reporting for the substance abuse history. Obviously, that might not be the most reliable way of gathering data, but it's how he did it in this test. And in this test, he found that 39% of the people who experienced childhood trauma had issues with substance abuse, or more specifically, alcohol abuse. And that was followed by cocaine abuse with 34%. These are really dramatic kind of statistics compared to that of a normal control group, as 34% is way higher above the average mean. And Jabari kind of shares why this is the case. In 2018, he shared that these substances are used to dampen mood symptoms associated with a high biological stress response that's experienced in those who experienced childhood trauma in the past. They use it as a coping mechanism, and whenever your executive functioning is affected, you can't necessarily diagnose and have the ability to assess the negatives that come with substance abuse issues. So what does all this mean? Jabari, Kuroy, as well as Staubach, Cathedral, and Brand, all their findings kind of correlate into one thing. Essentially, it shows that childhood trauma has a negative effect on executive functioning, making one more susceptible to drug abuse in the future. Uh, Obviously, this is not the case for every single individual who's experienced childhood trauma. However, the findings have shown that they greatly hinder and affect executive functioning in the future, making one more susceptible to drug or substance abuse. Um, yeah, and here are my references.